I sat at a Michelin-starred restaurant in downtown Chicago watching my mother swirl her expensive glass of wine. She smiled warmly at my sister's future mother-in-law before pointing her manicured finger directly at me. "This is our oldest daughter," she announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "She cleans houses for a living." My father chuckled and added that they had basically given up on me. The table went dead silent. The groom's mother, a high-powered banking executive, tilted her head and stared at me. "Wait," she whispered. "Are not you the woman who—" I caught her eye and gave a single, barely perceptible shake of my head. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening in realization, before a slow, calculating smile spread across her face. "My name is Cassidy, and I am 34 years old. I let my family believe I was a struggling maid while I secretly built a real estate management empire worth hundreds of millions." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to let toxic people dig their own graves before finally handing them the shovel. To understand how we ended up at this disastrous engagement dinner, you have to understand the dynamic of my family. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Chicago, appearances were everything to my parents, Richard and Brenda. They lived for country club memberships, luxury cars leased on terrible terms, and the illusion of generational wealth. My younger sister Madison, who is 29, was molded to be their masterpiece. She was the golden child, pampered, spoiled, and completely shielded from consequence. I was the opposite. I was independent-driven and distinctly unimpressed by their superficial lifestyle. When I was 19, my parents secretly drained my college savings account to pay off Madison's massive credit card debts and fund her lavish gap year in Europe. When I found out, I was devastated. I confronted them, and my mother simply told me that family sacrifices for family and that I could easily take out student loans. Instead of fighting a losing battle, I packed my bags, moved into a cheap studio apartment, and started a cleaning business to survive. For the next 15 years, my parents proudly told everyone I was a college dropout who scrubbed toilets for a living. They never bothered to check in on me, so they never learned that my little cleaning service had evolved into Lumina Estate Management, a premier corporation managing commercial properties and ultra-luxury estates across the country. Which brings us back to the private dining room at the restaurant. Madison was engaged to Terrence. Terrence is 31, a brilliant and highly successful African-American corporate lawyer. He comes from a family of self-made intellectuals and executives. His mother, Yvonne, is a 55-year-old senior executive at one of the largest commercial banks in the nation. She is a woman of immense power, sharp instincts, and zero tolerance for nonsense. I liked her immediately. My parents, on the other hand, were desperately trying to impress Yvonne and Terrence. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu, name-dropped imaginary celebrity friends, and boasted about Madison's supposedly successful boutique business. Madison sat next to Terrence, wearing a designer dress she definitely could not afford, playing the role of the perfect innocent bride-to-be. I had been invited purely as a prop. My mother needed me there to make Madison look better by comparison. Throughout the appetizers, Brenda kept making passive-aggressive comments about my clothes, my posture, and my lack of a husband. I just smiled and ate my sea bass. Then came the main course, and the moment my mother decided to establish dominance. She leaned across the table, placing a hand on Yvonne's arm. "Yvonne, we are just so thrilled Terrence found Madison," my mother said, her voice echoing in the private room. "She has always been the ambitious one in the family, our little entrepreneur." Yvonne smiled politely, taking a sip of her sparkling water. "And what about you, Cassidy?" Yvonne asked, turning her sharp gaze to me. "Madison mentioned you work in the service industry." Before I could answer, my mother let out a loud theatrical sigh. "This is our oldest daughter," Brenda announced to the table, her tone laced with contempt. "She cleans houses for a living. We try to encourage her to go back to school, but some people just lack ambition." My father Richard laughed as he cut his steak. "We have pretty much given up on her," he added cheerfully. "But hey, someone has to scrub the floors, right?" Terrence looked physically uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat, His brow furrowed as he glanced between me and my parents. I could tell he was a man of integrity, and witnessing parents publicly humiliate their own child was deeply unsettling to him. But it was Yvonne's reaction that changed the entire trajectory of the evening. Yvonne froze. She set her glass down slowly, her keen eyes locked onto mine, studying my face, then moving to the tailored but understated blazer I was wearing. As a banking executive who handled multi-million-dollar corporate real estate portfolios, Yvonne had an extensive network. And just last week, my company Lumina Estate Management had signed a 9-figure contract to manage her bank's entire chain of properties across the Midwest. We had not met face-to-face during the negotiations, but my photo had been on the cover of the corporate prospectus she had personally approved. "Wait," Yvonne whispered, leaning forward. "Are not you the woman who—" I held her gaze. The air in the room grew thick. My mother looked confused, her fake smile faltering. I knew exactly what Yvonne was about to say. She was about to out me as a CEO. She was about to ruin my carefully maintained cover. I looked right into Yvonne's eyes and gave a single firm shake of my head. It was a silent, absolute command. Do not say it. Yvonne is a master reader of rooms. She saw my parents' smug faces, Madison's fake innocence, and my absolute calm. She processed the entire toxic family dynamic in a fraction of a second. The realization washed over her, and a slow, brilliant, almost predatory smile spread across her face. She leaned back in her chair, elegantly picking up her napkin. "Are not you the woman who handles the cleaning for the Kensington properties?" Yvonne pivoted flawlessly, naming a wealthy family in her social circle. "I hear you do a very thorough job. All honest work is respectable, Brenda. You should be proud she is making an honest living." My mother's face flushed with irritation. Yvonne's defense of me was not part of her script. "Well, yes," Brenda stammered. "But we just wish she would apply herself like Madison." I picked up my wine glass and raised it slightly toward Yvonne in a silent toast. She offered a tiny conspiratorial nod in return. In that split second, an unspoken alliance was forged between us. The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in awkward tension. Madison, desperate to reclaim the spotlight, began dominating the conversation. She bragged about her wedding plans, dropping hints about wanting to book an exclusive venue called the Vanguard Estate. She went on and on about how it was the most luxurious property in the state, completely unaware that she was talking about a property my corporation had acquired just 30 days prior. Terrence remained quiet, his eyes occasionally darting to his mother, clearly sensing that Yvonne knew something he did not. He looked at Madison with a new guarded expression. The facade my family had constructed was beginning to show its cracks, and I was perfectly content to sit back, finish my dessert, and watch them lay the groundwork for their own spectacular destruction. What is the significance of the Vanguard estate to Cassidy's family? The dessert plates were cleared away by the waitstaff, leaving only the soft clinking of crystal and the low murmur of other patrons in the restaurant. Madison seized this lull in the conversation as an opportunity to launch into another monologue about her so-called boutique business. She tossed her highlighted hair over her shoulder and leaned closer to Terrence, ensuring Yvonne had a front-row seat to her performance. "I am just so passionate about curating lifestyle experiences," Madison beamed, using her hands to emphasize her words. "My boutique is all about synergy and vertical integration. We are looking at a massive return on investment by Q3. I mean, scaling a brand in today's economic climate takes a true visionary." She strung the corporate buzzwords together like cheap beads on a necklace. Anyone with an ounce of business acumen could tell she was reciting phrases she had skimmed from a motivational podcast without understanding their actual application. I took a slow sip of my Cabernet, keeping my face perfectly blank. I had spent 15 years building a thick skin against my family's insults. Letting them see any emotion was a victory I refused to give them. Terrence offered Madison an encouraging smile, though I could see the slight tension around his eyes. As a high-powered corporate lawyer, he navigated complex mergers and acquisitions daily. He had grown up in an affluent, highly educated African-American household where intellectual rigor was the baseline. He had to know her jargon made absolutely no sense. But he was in love, or at least in love with the version of Madison she had presented to him. A version that was rapidly unraveling under his mother's scrutiny. Yvonne was not blinded by affection. The seasoned banking executive rested her chin on her steepled fingers, her gaze sharp and analytical. She nodded politely at Madison's rambling, but her eyes kept drifting back to me. My mother, completely oblivious to the silent judgment radiating from Yvonne, decided it was the perfect time to elevate her favorite child at my expense. "It takes a very special kind of intellect to run a business," Brenda announced loudly. She reached over and patted Madison's hand. Madison has always had that drive. Unlike some people who are perfectly content scrubbing other people's baseboards for minimum wage. Richard chuckled, swirling his scotch. "Well, the world needs ditch diggers too, Brenda." Cassidy found her level. "We accept it." A heavy, suffocating awkwardness settled over the table. Terrence cleared his throat, clearly appalled by the sheer cruelty of my parents' remarks. He opened his mouth, likely to change the subject or defend me, but Yvonne beat him to it. Yvonne did not look at Brenda or Richard. She ignored them entirely and directed her piercing gaze straight at me. "You know," Cassidy Yvonne began, her voice smooth and deliberate, "since you spend so much time maintaining properties, I am curious about your perspective. My bank is currently evaluating a portfolio of historic commercial buildings downtown. We are running into endless issues with structural depreciation and local zoning ordinances. It is a nightmare trying to retrofit modern HVAC systems into buildings erected in the 1920s without violating historical preservation codes. Have you ever encountered anything like that in your line of work?" My parents exchanged confused glances. They clearly thought Yvonne was mocking me, asking a lowly maid a complex real estate question. Brenda opened her mouth to apologize for my inevitable ignorance, but I did not give her the chance. I set my wine glass down and met Yvonne's eyes directly. "Historical preservation codes are certainly rigid," I replied, my tone conversational but incredibly precise. However, the city recently passed an amendment to Section 4 of the zoning regulations. If you classify the HVAC retrofitting as essential structural stabilization rather than a cosmetic upgrade, you can bypass the historical board's primary review process. Furthermore, if your bank utilizes the Federal Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit, you can offset 20% of those retrofitting costs. The key is ensuring your contractors use ductless mini-split systems, which require minimal architectural intrusion and instantly satisfy the Preservation Committee's visual guidelines. The silence that followed was absolute. Madison stared at me, her mouth hanging slightly open. My parents looked as though I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. They could not comprehend how the daughter they had spent a decade treating like dirt possessed that kind of specialized knowledge. Terrence sat up straighter, his eyes locked on me. His lawyer instincts flared to life. He looked at my tailored suit, analyzed my calm demeanor, and processed the high-level commercial real estate advice I had just casually dropped over dessert. The confusion in his eyes slowly morphed into intense, burning curiosity. Yvonne let out a rich, genuine laugh. It was the first real emotion she had shown all evening. "Is that right?" Yvonne said, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "Section 4, you say? I will have my legal team look into that exact loophole on Monday." That is remarkably insightful advice from someone who just cleans houses. I offered her a polite, modest smile. "You pick up a few things when you pay attention to the foundations," I replied. The silent alliance between Yvonne and me was permanently cemented in that exact moment. She knew exactly who I was. She knew I was the CEO of Lumina Estate Management. She knew I held contracts worth more than my parents could earn in 10 lifetimes. And most importantly, she knew I was biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Brenda, furious that I had somehow managed to impress the wealthy future mother-in-law, immediately tried to regain control of the narrative. "Cassidy reads a lot of magazines while she waits for the bus," Brenda snapped, waving a hand dismissively. "Let us not get off track. Madison, tell Yvonne about the new marketing campaign you are launching next month." Madison eagerly took the lifeline, launching into another dizzying monologue about social media algorithms and influencer outreach. but the dynamic at the table had irrevocably shifted. Yvonne was no longer listening to Madison. Terrence was no longer looking at his fiancée with blind adoration. Terrence kept casting subtle, calculating glances my way. He was putting the pieces together. If my parents were lying about my intelligence and my career, what else were they lying about? If Madison was comfortable letting her family humiliate her sister, what did that say about her character? I sat back in my chair, radiating total peace. My parents thought they were using this dinner to secure a wealthy marriage for their golden child. They had no idea they had just invited a Trojan horse to the table. The evening was winding down, and I knew exactly what was coming next. The waiter was approaching our table with a black leather folder, and I could already see Madison shifting her purse, preparing to enact her signature financial disappearing act. I caught Yvonne's eye one last time. We both knew the game was on. The waiter approached our table with the posture of a man delivering a royal decree. He held a sleek black leather folder, the kind that always signaled an astronomical total at establishments like this. We had dined on imported Wagyu beef, rare white truffles, and vintage champagne that my father had insisted on ordering to impress his future son-in-law. I knew the menu well. I also knew that the final tally would easily exceed $4,000. The waiter placed the folder precisely in the center of the table. For a long moment, nobody moved. The lingering scent of rich food and expensive perfume hung heavy in the air. My father cleared his throat, suddenly finding the restaurant ceiling incredibly interesting. My mother took a slow, deliberate sip of her tap water. This was the classic family standoff. They loved playing billionaires, but they despised actually footing the bill. Madison let out a dramatic gasp. She snatched the leather folder, opened it, and her eyes widened in rehearsed shock. $4,500, she whispered loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. She immediately reached for her sparkling designer clutch. I watched her dig through the contents, her manicured acrylic nails scraping against the fabric. Her breathing quickened into a perfect imitation of a panic attack. "Oh my gosh," she stammered, pulling out her phone and furiously tapping the screen. "My bank just sent me an alert. They locked my primary credit card. They think it is fraudulent activity because of all the wedding vendors I paid earlier today." She looked up at Terrence with wide, watery eyes, playing the victim flawlessly. "Baby, I am so embarrassed. My accounts are frozen until Monday morning." Terrence reached for his wallet without hesitation. "I can cover it, Madison. Do not worry about it at all." But my mother intervened. Brenda slammed her hand on the table, her rings clinking against the wood. "Absolutely not, Terrence. You are the guest of honor tonight. We would never ask you to pay for your own engagement dinner. We are traditionalists." Terrence looked relieved but confused. "If you insist, Mrs. Brenda." My father, Richard, leaned forward. He grabbed the leather folder from Madison and with a swift, aggressive motion slid it entirely across the table. It skidded across the white tablecloth and stopped inches from my plate. "You clean rich people's houses, Cassidy," Richard said, his voice loud and dripping with venom. "You must get plenty of cash tips from your wealthy clients. Go ahead and pay for your sister. Consider it your wedding gift to her, since you probably cannot afford anything off their registry anyway." Brenda nodded vigorously, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Exactly. You have no husband, no mortgage, and you live in some tiny apartment. You have no real expenses. Be a good older sister for once in your life and take care of this." The sheer audacity of their demand hung in the air. They were actively humiliating me in front of high society, treating me like a walking ATM, while simultaneously mocking my supposed poverty. Madison sniffled, wiping away a fake tear, waiting for me to pull out a handful of crumpled $20 bills and beg the waiter for a payment plan. They wanted me broken. They wanted Terrence's family to see me as the pathetic, subservient outcast. I did not flinch. I did not argue. I maintained perfect icy eye contact with my father. I slowly reached into my tailored blazer and pulled out my slim card holder. I did not carry cash. I did not carry standard plastic credit cards. I extracted a sleek, solid titanium American Express Centurion card, the legendary black card. It is an invite-only card reserved exclusively for ultra-high net worth individuals who spend millions annually. It is heavy, cold, and unmistakable. I placed the card on top of the bill inside the leather folder. The heavy metal made a sharp, solid clack against the wooden table. Yvonne immediately sat up straight, her eyes locked onto the black titanium. As a senior banking executive, she knew exactly what that card represented. She knew the exorbitant initiation fees and the staggering financial requirements needed just to hold it in your hand. She looked from the card to me, her cool smile returning with full force. She recognized power and she was watching me wield it. Terrence leaned forward, his sharp legal mind snapping into focus. He recognized the card instantly. The confusion on his face was replaced by utter bewilderment. He looked at the heavy titanium, then at my parents, then directly at me. His brain was working in overdrive, trying to reconcile the narrative of a struggling house cleaner with the reality of a woman dropping a Centurion card on a $4,500 dinner without a second thought. My parents, completely ignorant of high-level financial instruments, simply saw a black piece of metal. Well, Brenda huffed, crossing her arms and rolling her eyes. I hope that prepaid debit card has enough funds on it. I would hate for the restaurant to decline it and embarrass us further. I signaled the waiter, who had been standing discreetly a few paces away. He stepped forward, picked up the folder, and felt the unmistakable weight of the card. His eyes widened slightly. He bowed his head with sudden profound respect. Right away, madam, he murmured, hurrying off to process the payment immediately. I stood up from the table and smoothed the front of my blazer. I looked down at my family, feeling nothing but cold detachment. The dinner is paid for, I said, keeping my voice steady and commanding. Congratulations on your engagement, Madison. I am sure your wedding will be an unforgettable event. Terrence stood up abruptly, opening his mouth to speak. Cassidy, wait. How do you— I did not give him the chance to finish his sentence. I turned my back on my stunned family, offered a final nod of respect to Yvonne, and walked out of the private dining room. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor as I exited the restaurant. I stepped out into the cool Chicago night air, leaving Terrence to drown in his mounting suspicions, and my parents completely oblivious to the empire they had just insulted. The crisp Chicago wind hit my face as I handed my ticket to the valet attendant. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, feeling the tension of the dining room wash away. I had just initiated a chain reaction that would inevitably dismantle my family's entire facade, and I felt nothing but absolute clarity. Before the valet could even turn to retrieve my vehicle, the heavy glass and brass doors of the restaurant swung open behind me. Madison marched out onto the pavement, her designer heels striking the concrete with aggressive force. She had left Terrence and our parents inside at the table, clearly unable to let the evening end without getting the final word. She wrapped her expensive shawl tightly around her shoulders, glaring at me with narrow, furious eyes. You think you are so clever, Madison hissed, closing the distance between us. Throwing down some flashy metal corporate card to pay the bill. Mom and Dad might not understand how business expenses work, but I do. I know that is just a prepaid expense account your clients give you to buy wholesale bleach and floor wax. You probably maxed out your company budget just to show off in front of my future mother-in-law. I looked at my younger sister, marveling at her desperate need to minimize my existence. She was drowning in $200,000 of undisclosed debt, trying to trap a wealthy corporate lawyer into marriage, yet she still felt entitled to look down on me. I did not correct her assumptions about the Centurion card. Let her believe whatever helped her sleep at night. Is there a reason you followed me out here, Madison? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. She scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. Yes, actually. Since you decided to make a spectacle of yourself tonight, you can make it up to me by making yourself useful for the wedding. I waited, letting the silence stretch. I knew whatever came out of her mouth next was going to be remarkably audacious, but even I underestimated her sheer entitlement. We booked the Vanguard estate for the ceremony and the reception, Madison announced, lifting her chin with intense pride. She paused, clearly expecting me to gasp in awe. The Vanguard estate was legendary in Illinois. It was a sprawling, historic mega mansion, sitting on 30 acres of pristine landscape, famous for its grand ballrooms, crystal chandeliers, and centuries-old architecture. It was the premier venue for the ultra-wealthy, requiring massive deposits and years of waiting to secure a single date. It is incredibly exclusive, Madison continued, leaning in closer. And the new ownership is notoriously strict about property maintenance. They require the venue to be absolutely immaculate before the vendors can even begin setting up the floral arrangements and the staging. Terrence's family is paying a fortune for the catering, so the least you can do is pull your weight. I stared at her, my face perfectly still. Are you asking me to clean your wedding venue? I am telling you to bring your little maid service to the estate 3 days before the wedding, Madison corrected sharply. You will do a full deep clean of the grand ballroom, the bridal suites, and the main terrace. And obviously you are doing it for free. Consider it your sisterly duty. It will serve as your wedding gift to me since we both know you cannot afford anything off my registry. The sheer monumental irony of her demand hit me like a shockwave. Madison was standing on a Chicago sidewalk berating me, demanding my free manual labor to scrub the floors of a multi-million-dollar venue so she could pretend to be a billionaire bride. She had absolutely no idea. She did not know that 30 days ago my corporation, Lumina Estate Management, had executed a hostile takeover of the hospitality group that previously managed that exact property. She did not know that I had personally signed the acquisition papers. She did not know that the notoriously strict new ownership she was complaining about was me. Lumina Estate Management literally owned the Vanguard estate. I owned the ballroom she wanted to dance in. I owned the bridal suite she planned to get dressed in. I owned the very ground she was planning to walk on. I looked at my sister, whose face was twisted in a demanding, arrogant sneer. A brilliant, chilling strategy began to form in my mind. If I refused, she would run back to our parents crying about how unsupportive I was. If I fought her, she would play the victim. But if I agreed, I would have full access to the venue. I would have total control over the chessboard. A slow, eerie smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile that usually made my corporate rivals sweat, but Madison was too self-absorbed to recognize the danger. You are absolutely right, Madison, I said, my voice smooth as silk. Family is important. And I want your wedding day to be exactly what you deserve. I will personally make sure my team is there. We will do a complete sweep of the estate. Madison looked slightly taken aback by my easy compliance, but her ego quickly pushed any suspicions aside. She smirked, flipping her hair over her shoulder. See, that wasn't so hard, she said condescendingly. Make sure you use the service entrance at the back of the property. I do not want Terrence's family seeing my sister hauling trash bags around. You are just there to clean up Cassidy. Stay out of sight. I will be entirely out of sight, I promised softly, until the perfect moment. The valet pulled up to the curb. He stepped out of a sleek custom black Porsche Panamera, leaving the engine purring. Madison frowned, staring at the high-performance luxury vehicle, clearly trying to compute how a cleaning lady had access to such a machine. She opened her mouth to ask, likely assuming I had stolen a client's car for the night. I did not give her the satisfaction of an answer. I handed the valet a crisp $100 bill, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door. I rolled down the tinted window just a fraction. I will see you at the Vanguard Estate, Madison. I promise you it will be a day you never forget. I rolled the window up, shifted the car into gear, and pulled away from the curb. I left her standing alone on the pavement, shivering in the cold. As I drove through the glittering city streets toward my penthouse, my mind shifted from defense to offense. Madison thought she had just bullied a maid into free labor. She did not know she had just handed the keys to her entire facade directly to the executioner. My parents had stolen from me, belittled me, and used me for decades. Now they were going to walk willingly into a trap built of their own vanity inside a fortress that I owned. The game was finally set. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office on the 40th floor of Lumina Estate Management headquarters. I sat behind my polished obsidian desk, reviewing the final acquisition and transition documents for the Vanguard estate. The takeover was complete, the property was secured under my corporate umbrella, and my security teams were already actively monitoring the grounds. Everything was operating with flawless precision. Then my private cell phone buzzed. I glanced at the glowing screen. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. Brenda rarely called me unless she needed someone to degrade or something to extract. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, pressed the answer button, and placed the phone on speaker. I need your social security number and a digital signature sent to my email immediately, Brenda barked, entirely bypassing a hello. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, my eyes scanning a multi-million-dollar vendor contract on my monitor. Good morning to you too, Mother. To what do I owe this incredibly urgent demand for my highly sensitive personal information? Do not use that condescending tone with me. Brenda snapped, the sound of rustling fabric and background chatter echoing through the speaker. Madison found her dream wedding dress. It is a custom haute couture gown imported directly from a designer in Paris. It is absolutely stunning, and it is going to make Terrence's family realize exactly what caliber of woman they are welcoming into their home. And how does Madison's dress require my signature? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. The bridal boutique requires a co-signer for the financing, Brenda explained, her tone dripping with intense irritation. Madison has her assets tied up in her business right now, and your father and I are moving some investments around to pay for the floral arrangements. The dress is $50,000. The financing company just needs a secondary signature to push the approval through today. Since you have no mortgage and no real expenses, your credit score should be clean enough to act as a guarantor. I let the sheer insanity of her request hang in the air for a moment. My mother was aggressively demanding that her supposedly impoverished housecleaning daughter co-sign a $50,000 loan so her golden child could wear a Parisian gown for a single day. The financial delusion of my family was truly staggering. I will not be signing any financing documents, Mother, I replied evenly. If Madison cannot afford a $50,000 dress, she should perhaps look for something within her actual budget. The line went dead silent for a fraction of a second before Brenda exploded. You selfish, ungrateful brat, Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in my spacious office. You owe your sister. After you dropped out of college, you became a burden. We had to suffer the embarrassment of telling all our friends that our eldest daughter was a failure who scrubbed toilets. This is the absolute least you can do to repay us for the shame you caused this family. I stopped reading my contracts. I placed my pen down on the desk. The cold, calculated executive part of my brain locked entirely into focus. I did not drop out, I said, my voice dropping an octave, slicing through her hysterical shouting like a razor. I was administratively withdrawn because my tuition checks bounced. You simply could not handle the academic pressure, Brenda scoffed, attempting to rewrite history the way she always did. Do not gaslight me, Mother. We both know exactly what happened. I countered, my tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. I had a partial academic scholarship. I relied on the college trust fund that my grandparents legally left in my name to cover my housing, my textbooks, and the remaining tuition. But when I went to the bank during my sophomore year to pay my university fees, the account was empty. I paused, letting the reality of her crime breathe. You and Richard forged my signature, I continued coldly, laying out the facts. You illegally bypassed the trust restrictions and drained $80,000 from my account. You stole my college fund to pay off the catastrophic credit card debts Madison racked up during her freshman year. You drained my future to buy her a luxury SUV so she would not look poor in front of her sorority sisters. You left me with $0 in eviction notice from my dorm and a massive tuition debt I could not pay. That is why I was forced to clean houses. I had to scrub biohazards off floors just to buy groceries while you paraded Madison around the country club. You are twisting the past, Brenda yelled, though her voice shook with the panic of a woman whose deepest sins had just been exposed to the harsh light of day. Madison needed that car for her social standing. She was networking with important people. You were studying something completely useless. Family sacrifices for family. We did what we had to do to protect Madison's future. And I did what I had to do to survive the destruction of mine, I replied flawlessly. You made your choice 15 years ago. You chose to sacrifice me to fund her delusions. You do not get to come back now and demand my credit score to fund her wedding dress. If you do not sign this loan document right now, I will officially ban you from attending the wedding reception, Brenda threatened, utilizing her absolute favorite weapon. You will use the service entrance at the Vanguard estate, you will clean the ballroom, and then you will leave through the back door, like the hired help you are. You will be dead to this family. I looked around my immaculate executive office. I looked at the legal deed to the Vanguard estate sitting directly on my desk. I will not be signing anything, I said, my voice a whisper of pure ice. Good luck with the dress, Mother. I pressed the button on my screen and ended the call. I did not cry. I did not shake. The emotional wounds my parents had inflicted on me had scarred over and turned to steel a long time ago. I felt nothing but a clinical, absolute resolve to see this game through to its inevitable, devastating conclusion. I leaned forward and pressed the intercom button on my desk console. Yes, boss, my chief financial officer David answered immediately. David, I said, keeping my gaze locked on the city skyline outside my window. I need you to place a maximum security lock and a hard monitoring trace on my personal social security number and all my private credit profiles. Flag any hard inquiries immediately. Is there a specific threat we are looking for? David asked, his tone shifting into high alert. My family is desperate for $50,000, and they have a history of financial forgery, I explained calmly. If they cannot bully me into signing a loan, they might be stupid enough to try and steal my identity to get it. Understood. I will lock it down right now, David confirmed. I released the intercom button. My parents thought they were dealing with the helpless, broken 19-year-old girl they had robbed a decade and a half ago. They were about to find out exactly what kind of monster they had created in the dark. 2 days after locking down my credit profiles, a notification illuminated the screen of my secure corporate phone. It was a message from an unknown number, but the syntax was precise and intensely formal. Cassidy, this is Terrence. We need to speak privately. Madison does not know I am contacting you. Name the time and place. I smiled, resting my phone against my mahogany desk. The sharp corporate lawyer was finally putting the pieces together. I texted him the address of an exclusive members-only coffee lounge located deep in the heart of the Chicago financial district. It was a place where billionaires and elite executives conducted discreet business, a place where Madison and my parents could never simply wander in. I arrived at the lounge precisely at 10 the next morning. Terrence was already seated in a secluded leather booth in the back corner, nursing a black espresso. He looked exhausted. The polished, confident groom I had met at the engagement dinner had completely vanished. In his place sat a highly trained attorney whose instincts were screaming that he was being played. I approached the table wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected quiet authority. Terrence stood up out of ingrained politeness, though his dark eyes were weary and guarded. I slid into the booth across from him, crossing my legs and folding my hands on the pristine marble tabletop. Terrence decided to skip the pleasantries entirely. My fiancé told me that the black card you used at the restaurant was a prepaid corporate expense card. Terrence began, his voice low and tight. She claimed it was given to you by a client to purchase bulk cleaning supplies for your maid service. I let out a soft, amused breath but said nothing. As an attorney who handles mergers for high-net-worth clients, Terrence continued, leaning forward. I know exactly what an American Express Centurion card is. I know the spending requirements. I know the initiation fees. You do not get one by scrubbing baseboards, Cassidy. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. You are very observant, Terrence. Terrence dragged a hand down his face, frustration bleeding through his professional facade. Your parents treat you with absolute contempt. Madison talks about you like you are a stray dog she pities. They openly humiliate you in front of strangers. Yet you sat there at that dinner, utterly unbothered, giving my mother real estate loophole advice that seasoned tax attorneys charge thousands of dollars an hour for. Nothing about the narrative your family is selling me adds up. None of it makes sense. I watched him closely. I could see the genuine turmoil in his eyes. Terrence was an honorable man. He came from a family that valued education, integrity, and hard work. He had built his own success and assumed Madison shared those same core values. He was slowly realizing that he was about to legally bind himself to a family composed entirely of professional grifters. And what exactly are you asking me, Terrence? I inquired, keeping my tone gentle but firm. He looked me dead in the eye. I am asking you who you really are. Because if Madison is lying to me about her own sister, I need to know what else she is hiding before I sign a marriage certificate. I was just about to answer him when the heavy oak door of the lounge swung open. The ambient noise in the room seemed to hush. Yvonne walked in. Terrence's mother looked absolutely magnificent in a slate-gray power suit, carrying a designer leather briefcase with the undeniable authority of a commanding general. Her sharp gaze scanned the room locked onto our secluded booth, and she marched directly toward us. Terrence blinked in sheer shock as his mother approached the table. "Mother," he asked, standing up slightly, "what are you doing here?" Yvonne waved him down with a single elegant motion of her hand. She slid into the booth right next to me, signaling the waiter for an espresso, before turning her piercing gaze to her son. "I am here, Terrence, because it is time you knew exactly who you are marrying into," Yvonne stated, her voice smooth, but laced with iron. "And more importantly, it is time you knew exactly who you have been ignoring." Terrence looked back and forth between his mother and me, his confusion deepening. "You two know each other." Yvonne smiled a cool, calculating smile. She gestured toward me with open respect. "Terrence, allow me to properly introduce you to Cassidy. She is not a maid. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Lumina Estate Management. She is a titan in the commercial real estate sector." Terrence froze. The air in his lungs seemed to vanish. Yvonne did not stop there. "In fact, just last week, my bank signed a $100 million portfolio management contract with her corporation. Cassidy oversees assets worth more than Madison and your future in-laws could even comprehend. She is a self-made powerhouse, and your fiancé has been parading her around as the family failure to massage her own pathetic ego." Terrence's jaw practically unhinged. He stared at me, then at his mother, the reality of my true identity crashing down on him like a tidal wave. The woman his fiancé had ordered to clean up after her was actually a corporate titan who sat in rooms with the most powerful executives in the city. "Madison told me you dropped out of college?" Terrence stammered, his legal mind frantically trying to process the magnitude of the lie. "She said you were drowning in debt." I smiled thinly, my eyes turning as hard as flint. "Madison projects her own insecurities exceptionally well," I replied. "I did not drop out. Our parents drained my college trust fund to pay off Madison's shopping addictions. They forced me onto the streets and I built an empire out of the dirt they left me in." Terrence fell back against the leather booth, looking physically ill. If Madison could lie this easily, this seamlessly, about her own sister's entire existence, the implications were terrifying. Yvonne reached across the table and placed a steadying hand on her son's arm. "I saw the way that family treated her at dinner," Yvonne said quietly. "And I see the way Madison looks at your bank accounts. You are a smart man, Terrence. It is time to wake up and see the trap you are walking into." Terrence looked at me, the betrayal from his fiancée burning hot in his chest. "What else is she hiding, Cassidy?" he demanded, his voice thick with rising anger. I picked up my coffee cup, taking a slow, deliberate sip. "I think, Terrence, it is time you ran a comprehensive financial background check on your future bride, because you are not going to like what you find." Terrence sat perfectly still, the sleek leather of the booth creaking softly as he braced his weight against the table. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and razor-sharp. I had just told him to run a financial background check on his future bride, and the sheer certainty in my voice left absolutely no room for doubt. He looked at his mother. Yvonne simply took a slow sip of her espresso and offered a single confirming nod. The illusion Terrence had been living in shattered completely. He was a highly intelligent corporate attorney, a man whose entire career was built on identifying fraud, analyzing risk, and protecting his clients from bad investments. Yet he had allowed a superficial woman with a convincing smile to blind him to the massive red flags waving right in front of his face. The humiliation of that realization washed over him, hardening his features into a mask of pure professional calculation. "I still cannot process the scale of this," Terrence said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Madison told me you lived in a subsidized apartment. She told me you cleaned up biohazards and hoarder houses because you had no other marketable skills. She spun this entire tragic narrative about how much it broke her heart to see her older sister fail so spectacularly. Yvonne set her cup down with a sharp clink against the saucer. She spun a narrative to elevate herself, Terence. It is a classic diversion tactic. If everyone is busy looking at the supposed failure in the room, nobody is looking at the actual fraud. Cassidy does not clean properties. She acquires them, revitalizes them, and controls them. Yvonne leaned forward, addressing her son with the commanding tone of a senior banking executive. You need to understand the magnitude of the woman sitting across from you. When my bank put out a call for bids to manage our commercial real estate portfolio, we received proposals from the largest global firms in the country. Cassidy completely dismantled her competition. Her corporation, Lumina Estate Management, came in with a strategic infrastructure plan that saved us 20% in projected operational costs. We did not hand her a $100 million contract out of charity. We gave it to her because she is a ruthless, brilliant operator. Terence stared at me, the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. He looked at the impeccable tailoring of my charcoal suit, the confident posture I held, and the absolute lack of intimidation I showed in the face of his mother's immense power. It all made terrifying sense now. You sat there at the restaurant, Terence muttered, running a hand over his jaw. You sat there while your father told me they had given up on you. You let them hand you a $4,500 dinner bill, like you were their personal servant. Why did you not say anything? Why did you not crush them right then and there? Because premature execution is sloppy, I replied, my voice cool and measured. If I had thrown my net worth in their faces at that table, they would have instantly played the victims. My mother would have cried. My father would have accused me of hoarding wealth while the family struggled. Madison would have twisted the story to make me look like a cruel, arrogant tyrant. I have spent 15 years building my empire in the shadows, Terence. I did not survive their abuse just to throw a petty tantrum over a steak dinner. When I dismantle their facade, I am going to do it so thoroughly that they will never recover. Terence leaned back, a profound respect, replacing his earlier bewilderment. The lovesick groom was entirely gone now. The sharp, predatory corporate lawyer was fully awake. It is starting to make sense, Terence said, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the recent past. The constant pressure for a lavish wedding. The rush to secure the most expensive venues and caterers. Madison insisted that we combine our finances early to streamline the wedding payments. She claimed her boutique business had its capital tied up in overseas inventory. Last week, she asked me to wire $30,000 to a vendor because her corporate account was undergoing an audit. Yvonne let out a sharp, humorless laugh. An audit? That is the oldest lie in the grifter playbook. I told you, Terence. I have survived 30 years in commercial banking by spotting bad investments from a mile away. Madison is a walking liability. Her parents are enablers. They saw your wealth, your status, and our family name, and they zeroed in on you like starving wolves. Terence clenched his jaw. He looked sick, but underneath the disgust was a cold, simmering fury. He had been played, and a man of his intellect did not take kindly to being used as a financial stepping stone. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a legal pad, and clicked his expensive fountain pen. I owe you a massive apology, Cassidy, Terence said, his pen hovering over the paper. I sat at that table and watched them treat you like dirt. I should have ended the dinner right there. You did not know the rules of the game we were playing, I replied smoothly. But you know them now. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Terence looked up, his dark eyes reflecting a lethal kind of determination. I am going to do exactly what you suggested. I am going to tear into her financial history with everything I have. I am going to pull every tax record, every credit report, and every LLC filing associated with her name. I am going to trace every dollar she claimed she invested in that imaginary boutique. He wrote down Madison's full legal name on the pad, underlining it twice with aggressive force. If she is hiding debt, I will find it. Terence promised, his voice devoid of any warmth. If she is using my money to pay off her personal failures, I will document every single wire transfer. I am going to build a watertight case against my own fiancé. Yvonne smiled approvingly, picking up her designer leather briefcase. That is my son. You gather the evidence, Terrence. Do not alert her. Do not change your behavior. Let her believe she still has her hooks buried deep. We strike only when we have absolute leverage. Yvonne turned her sharp gaze to me, her expression conveying profound mutual respect. It has been an absolute pleasure doing business with you, Cassidy. I have a feeling the next few weeks are going to be incredibly entertaining. The pleasure is all mine, Yvonne, I replied, offering a slight nod. Terrence stood up, sliding his legal pad back into his briefcase. He looked at me one last time, the alliance between us completely solidified. I will call you as soon as I have the financial reports, Terrence said. Thank you for waking me up, Cassidy. I watched him walk out of the private coffee lounge, his posture rigid with righteous anger. The trap was officially set. My sister thought she had secured a golden ticket to a life of endless luxury. She thought she could use her wealthy husband to fund her delusions while keeping her brilliant, successful sister locked in the basement of their family narrative. She was about to find out that the man she was trying to con was joining forces with the very sister she loved to humiliate. I signaled the waiter for the check, placed a crisp $100 bill on the marble table, and walked out into the bustling Chicago morning. The empire was finally stepping out of the shadows, and my family was entirely unprepared for the sheer force of the collision that was coming their way. Terrence walked into the towering glass and steel high-rise that housed his corporate law firm, his mind operating with the lethal precision of a guided missile. He bypassed his assistant with a brief nod, stepped into his corner office, and firmly locked the heavy oak door behind him. He dropped his briefcase onto his desk, stripped off his suit jacket, and rolled up his sleeves. The loving, supportive fiancé had vanished entirely. Sitting behind that desk was a ruthless litigator preparing to dissect a hostile entity. He fired up his dual monitors and bypassed the standard public search engines, logging directly into the premium restricted access legal and financial databases his firm utilized for corporate espionage and risk assessment. He typed Madison's full legal name, her date of birth, and her current address into the search bar. He hit enter, leaned back in his chair, and watched the digital curtain fall away from the woman he was supposed to marry. The results populated instantly, flashing across his screen in a relentless wave of red flags. Terrence started with the business. Madison had spent the last 2 years boasting about her luxury lifestyle brand, claiming it was expanding across the Midwest. Terrence pulled up the Illinois Secretary of State Business Registry and searched for her limited liability company. The status flashed on the screen in glaring capital letters. Involuntarily dissolved. He dug deeper, pulling the public court filings associated with the company name. Madison had not been running a successful boutique. She had been evicted from her commercial retail space exactly 12 months ago for failure to pay rent. There was a default judgment against her for $40,000 in back rent and damages. The state had placed a tax lien on the business for unpaid sales taxes. The company she had just spent 20 minutes bragging about to his mother, claiming it was looking at a massive return on investment by the third quarter, had been legally dead for a year. Terrence felt a cold knot form in his stomach, but he did not stop. He switched tabs, moving from her corporate failures to her personal financial footprint. He executed a soft pull on her credit history, utilizing a property management background check portal he had access to. The personal debt profile was staggering. It was not just bad financial management. It was a catastrophic high-speed collision of vanity and delusion. Madison was drowning in exactly $214,000 of unsecured high-interest debt. Terrence scrolled through the itemized list, his jaw tight. There were 3 maxed-out platinum credit cards. There were multiple personal loans taken out from subprime lenders with toxic interest rates. She was currently in collections for outstanding balances at luxury cosmetic dermatologists, high-end automotive leasing companies, and exclusive country clubs. She had been financing a millionaire lifestyle on predatory credit, using borrowed money to buy designer clothes, expensive dinners, and the illusion of success. The reality hit Terrence with the force of a freight train. He was not her partner. He was her bailout package. He opened his personal banking application on his secure phone, his hands moving mechanically. He navigated to the joint checking account he had recently opened with Madison to manage the incoming wedding expenses. He reviewed the transaction history from the past 45 days. Last week, Madison had asked him to deposit $30,000, claiming she needed to secure the deposit for a prestigious European floral designer whose corporate accounts were allegedly under audit. Terrence traced the routing number of the outgoing wire transfer. The money had not gone to a florist in Paris. It had gone directly to a high-risk collection agency based in Delaware, covering a settlement on one of her defaulted personal loans. He scrolled further down. $15,000 earmarked for customized wedding invitations and luxury catering deposits had been wired directly into a joint checking account owned by Richard and Brenda. Madison was actively draining his wealth to pay off her hidden debts and fund her parents' fraudulent lifestyle. Her entire family was completely broke, and they were using his hard-earned money to keep their heads above water. Terrence stared at the screen, the magnitude of the betrayal burning in his chest. He came from a family of proud, self-made African-American intellectuals who had fought for every ounce of their wealth and standing. His mother had shattered glass ceilings in the banking industry. He had worked 80-hour weeks to make partner at his firm. And this family of arrogant, superficial grifters thought they could use him as their personal bank, while simultaneously treating his brilliant self-made future sister-in-law like common trash. He picked up his phone and dialed my private number. I answered on the second ring, sitting comfortably in my own executive office across the city. "The boutique has been dead for a year," Terrence stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "She is $200,000 in the red. She is siphoning the wedding funds to pay off collection agencies and funneling cash directly to your parents." I leaned back in my leather chair, staring out at the Chicago skyline. "You verified the wire transfers." "Every single one," Terrence confirmed, his tone devoid of any lingering affection. "My mother was right. You were right. The entire marriage is a financial rescue operation. They found a mark with a heavy bank account and a good family name, and they sunk their teeth in." "What is your next move, Terrence?" I asked calmly. I could hear the sound of him closing his laptop, the sharp click echoing over the line. "If I cancel the wedding now, she plays the victim. She runs crying to her social circle, claims, 'I got cold feet,' and your parents sweep their crimes under the rug to find the next target. I am not letting them walk away with their dignity intact. I am going to let them put on their expensive suits. I am going to let them invite every high society connection they have. And then I am going to drop the guillotine in front of everyone." I smiled, a genuine feeling of profound respect settling over me. "Then we stick to the plan. You play the loving groom. I will continue to play the invisible maid. Let them get comfortable. Let them feel invincible. I will see you on the battlefield." Cassidy, Terrence said, his voice hard as steel. He ended the call. That evening, Terrence walked into the luxury condominium he shared with Madison. She was sitting on the velvet sofa, sipping a glass of imported wine, scrolling through digital fabric swatches for bridesmaid dresses. She looked up and beamed at him, playing the role of the adoring, innocent fiancé to absolute perfection. "How was your day at the firm, baby?" Madison asked, setting her wine down and walking over to wrap her arms around his neck. Terrence looked down at the woman who had stolen his money, lied about her entire existence, and conspired with her parents to treat her own sister like a peasant. He did not flinch. He did not pull away. He simply wrapped his arms around her waist, offering her a warm, flawless smile. "It was highly productive," Terrence replied smoothly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I finalized some very important contracts today. I promise you, Madison, our wedding day is going to be something nobody in your family will ever forget." The morning after Terrence made his silent vow to dismantle Madison's illusions, I sat at the head of the obsidian conference table in the Lumina Estate Management boardroom. We were finalizing the operational transition for our newly acquired assets, specifically focusing on the security protocols for the Vanguard estate. The room hummed with the quiet efficiency of top-tier executives executing a flawless corporate strategy. My mind was sharp, entirely focused on the profit margins and structural evaluations displayed on the massive digital monitor. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom slid open, breaking the focused silence. David, my chief financial officer, stepped into the room. He bypassed protocol entirely. He did not wait for a pause in the presentation. He walked straight to my chair, his face drawn tight, his knuckles white as he gripped a secure digital tablet. "We have a critical security breach," David whispered, leaning down so his voice would not carry across the long table. "I need you in your office, right now." I did not ask questions. I excused myself from the board members with a polite nod and followed David down the carpeted hallway into my private corner office. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, David handed me the tablet. His expression was a mixture of absolute professional outrage and deep personal concern. "The maximum security lock you requested for your personal financial profiles triggered a retroactive sweep of your credit history," David explained, pacing in front of my desk. The system flagged a catastrophic anomaly. A massive delinquency was just reported to the credit bureaus this morning. I looked down at the glowing screen. An $80,000 personal signature loan had just entered default status. It was attached directly to my Social Security number. I stared at the financial breakdown, my eyes tracking the exorbitant interest rates and the missed payment penalties. I had not taken out a personal loan in over a decade. Every asset I owned was shielded behind corporate holding companies or ironclad blind trusts. My personal credit profile was completely isolated from my business empire. "Pull the origination files," I ordered, my voice dropping to a dangerous flat calm. "Find out exactly where this originated and who authorized the disbursement." David tapped the screen, bypassing the encrypted firewalls to pull the original digital paperwork from the lender. It was a high-risk predatory loan secured 6 months ago, long before I had initiated the lockdown with my security team. I scrutinized the digital signature on the loan agreement. It was a meticulous, highly practiced forgery of my handwriting. But amateur criminals always leave a digital footprint, and the people who committed this fraud were spectacularly arrogant. David pointed to the origination IP address logged by the bank and the routing number where the $80,000 had been deposited. The IP address mapped directly to a residential suburb in Chicago, specifically my parents' house. The routing number belonged to a joint checking account owned by Richard and Brenda. The pieces snapped together with sickening, undeniable clarity. My parents had kept my Social Security number from when I was a teenager, living under their roof. When they realized they could not afford the extravagant high society wedding they had promised Madison, they did not scale back their vanity. They committed felony identity theft. They took out an $80,000 loan in my name to pay the initial deposits for the luxury catering, the designer gown, and the elite vendors before Terrence had stepped in to cover the rest. The sheer breathtaking audacity of their crime washed over me. They assumed I was just a struggling maid scrubbing toilets to survive. They figured a poor house cleaner would never run a comprehensive credit check or monitor her financial footprint. And if I somehow discovered the defaulted loan years down the line, they assumed I would be too impoverished and uneducated to hire the legal representation required to fight it in federal court. They intended to let my financial future burn to the ground, trapping me in insurmountable debt, just to keep their golden child clothed in Parisian silk for a single afternoon. They sat across from me at that Michelin-starred restaurant, sneering at my supposed poverty, demanding I pay for their $4,500 dinner, fully knowing they had already stolen $80,000 in my name. This was no longer just a case of toxic family dynamics. This was no longer just emotional manipulation or narcissistic vanity. They had crossed the line into a federal crime. I felt a cold, absolute silence settle over my entire body. The anger I had carried for 15 years evaporated, replaced by the chilling, methodical focus of an executioner. "Should I contact the authorities?" David asked, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I can have our legal department draft a fraud affidavit and send the police to their residence before lunch. Identity theft of this magnitude carries severe mandatory prison sentences." "No," I said smoothly, sliding the tablet back across the desk. "Do not contest the default with the lender yet. Do not flag the accounts. If we report the fraud right now, the bank will freeze their assets and alert them to the investigation. They will panic, they will hire defense attorneys, and they will try to hide behind a plea deal. I do not want them to panic in private. I want them to think they got away with it. David looked at me, a slow understanding dawning in his eyes. You are going to let them walk into the wedding. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling Chicago skyline. I am going to let them put on their expensive suits, I replied, my voice steady and lethal. I'm going to let them invite every single high society connection they desperately want to impress. I am going to let them stand inside a multi-million-dollar estate that I own, and then I'm going to drop the floor out from under them. I pulled my secure cell phone from my pocket and opened a new encrypted message thread with Terrence. I attached the digital origination files, the forged signature, and the IP address mapping directly to my parents' living room. I typed a single decisive message to the man who was currently gathering his own arsenal against my sister. They did not just lie to you, Terrence. They committed a felony. The trap is officially set. I hit send on the encrypted message to Terrence and watched the delivery confirmation flash on the screen. The response took less than 30 seconds. Terrence did not call or ask for clarification. He simply replied with 2 words: burn them. I locked my phone and walked out of my private office, heading straight for the executive war room situated at the core of the Lumina Estate Management Building. This room was a windowless, soundproof command center designed for hostile takeovers, corporate espionage defense, and crisis management. It was equipped with military-grade encrypted servers and floor-to-ceiling digital monitors. Today, it was going to be the staging ground for my family's total annihilation. I summoned David, my chief financial officer, and instructed him to bring in our lead corporate counsel, Preston. I told them both to drop whatever multi-million-dollar mergers they were currently reviewing. We had a case of domestic fraud that required our absolute and immediate focus. When David and Preston entered the war room, the heavy reinforced door locked automatically behind them. I stood at the head of the long glass table and projected the $80,000 fraudulent loan document onto the main screen. I did not shed a single tear. I did not seek their sympathy or offer any emotional exposition. I operated with the ruthless detachment of a surgeon preparing to excise a fatal tumor. My parents stole my social security number to fund a wedding. I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the cavernous room. They committed federal identity theft. I want every single digital fingerprint they left behind completely uncovered and documented by the end of the hour. Preston, a sharp and unforgiving litigator who had destroyed rival corporations for me in the past, did not even blink. He opened his laptop and immediately deployed our cybersecurity analysts. The predatory lender had authorized the initial signature online. Our team utilized back-channel legal software to subpoena the exact digital footprint of the loan origination. Within 20 minutes, the data populated on the main screen. Our analysts traced the originating IP address directly to the router registered at my parents' suburban Chicago address. They went a step further and pinpointed the specific device MAC address. It was Richard's desktop computer. The same computer my father used to manage his superficial country club memberships and complain about his taxes had been used to commit a federal felony against his own daughter. Next, I turned my attention to the forged electronic signature and the scanned physical documents submitted to the bank. Preston brought a forensic handwriting expert into the war room via a secure video link. We pulled up public records of my mother's handwriting from her various charity committee applications and country club event sign-up sheets. The expert confirmed within minutes that the loops and pressure points on the fraudulent loan application perfectly matched Brenda's distinct, overly flourished cursive. She had not even bothered to disguise her handwriting properly. She was so blinded by her own arrogance, so utterly convinced that I was a helpless, uneducated maid, that she assumed nobody would ever investigate the paperwork. But we needed the final nail in the coffin. A purely digital trail was not enough for the spectacle I was planning. The loan terms had required a physical notarization of secondary identity documents at a local branch of the lending institution. Using Preston's extensive legal leverage and a rapidly filed preservation order, We acquired the security camera footage from the bank lobby on the exact date and time the loan was finalized. I stood with my arms crossed, watching the high-definition video play on the war room monitor. There they were. Richard and Brenda walked into the bank wearing their usual tailored country club attire, looking completely relaxed and unbothered. Brenda handed a manila folder of documents to the loan officer. The high-resolution camera clearly captured the contents as she laid them on the desk. My old faded Social Security card, which she had kept hidden in a safe for 15 years, was sitting right there on the counter. I watched my parents smile warmly, shake hands with the bank manager, and walk out of the glass doors, having successfully stolen $80,000 to fund Madison's fake billionaire wedding. Watching my own flesh and blood cheerfully ruin my financial identity did not break my heart. It simply hardened my resolve into solid diamond. They felt absolutely no remorse. They believed I existed solely to be discarded and consumed for their benefit. Preston compiled the IP logs, the forensic handwriting analysis, the bank transaction records, and the high-definition security footage into a single devastating legal binder. He placed the heavy leather binder on the glass table in front of me. "If we hand this over to the district attorney right now," Preston advised, his tone strictly professional, "Richard and Brenda will be arrested by nightfall. The evidence is irrefutable. They will face mandatory minimums for identity theft and wire fraud." I placed my hand flat on the leather binder. "I am not handing this to the police today, Preston. If they are arrested quietly in their home, they will hire defense attorneys, negotiate a plea deal in secret, and lie to their high society friends about what happened. They will spin a narrative where they are the victims of a misunderstanding. I refuse to give them that luxury." David looked at me, a grim smile forming on his face. "You want maximum casualties." "I want a public execution," I corrected smoothly. "I want them to lose everything in front of the exact people they committed this crime to impress. Keep this binder secured in the corporate safe until I give the signal." I left the war room and walked back to my office, the adrenaline of the hunt pumping through my veins. The arsenal was fully assembled. The evidence was bulletproof. I pulled out my secure phone and initiated a three-way encrypted call with Terrence and his mother, Yvonne. The time for gathering intel was over. It was time to coordinate our final strike and build a trap so flawless my family would not realize they were dead until the ground disappeared beneath their feet. I sent the secure location coordinates to Terrence and Yvonne immediately after finishing my call with the Lumina Estate Management corporate team. 1 hour later, the three of us sat in the private soundproof library of my downtown Chicago penthouse. The heavy mahogany doors were locked tight, and the glittering city skyline glowed faintly through the rain-streaked floor-to-ceiling glass. Terrence paced across the Persian rug like a caged panther. He had spent the last hour reviewing the digital forensics I sent over the encrypted line, and the sophisticated corporate lawyer was currently losing a brutal battle against raw, unfiltered rage. Yvonne sat perfectly composed on a tufted velvet sofa, slowly swirling a glass of neat bourbon, though her dark eyes burned with a lethal protective intensity. "This is entirely psychotic," Terrence said, his voice dropping into a harsh vibrating register as he turned to face me. "My fiancé is a pathological liar drowning in $250,000 of toxic debt. Your parents just committed felony identity theft to fund a wedding reception. I am calling my firm right now. I am terminating every vendor contract. I am sending an email blast to my entire guest list stating that this wedding is permanently canceled due to criminal fraud, and then I am calling the Chicago police to have Richard and Brenda arrested in their sleep." He reached aggressively for his phone, his thumb hovering over his contacts. I stood up from my leather armchair and stepped directly into his path. "Do not make that call, Terrence," I said, keeping my tone absolutely level. He stared at me, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see a muscle jumping in his cheek. "Cassidy, they used your Social Security number to steal $80,000. They are actively siphoning my checking accounts. I am not standing at an altar with a woman who looks at me like a loaded ATM. It ends tonight. If you cancel the wedding tonight, they win," I explained patiently, holding his furious gaze without flinching. Terrence frowned, lowering his phone just a fraction. How do they win if they go to federal prison? Because they will not go to prison if you blow this up in private, I replied, outlining the grim reality of the justice system for the affluent. If you cancel the wedding via a mass email, Madison will instantly launch a massive social media campaign, painting herself as the devastated abandoned bride. Richard and Brenda will play the roles of the fiercely protective, heartbroken parents. They will hire aggressive defense attorneys, claim the loan was a misunderstanding or a clerical error, and leverage their country club connections to get the district attorney to offer a quiet slap on the wrist plea deal. They will maintain their wealthy facade, and you will look like the cruel, arrogant lawyer who left a poor girl at the altar. Yvonne took a slow sip of her bourbon and nodded in absolute agreement. Cassidy is entirely correct, Terrence. In the world of high finance and high society, optics are everything. If you kill the wedding quietly, they control the narrative. They will brand you as a coward who could not handle commitment, and they will brand Cassidy as a jealous, bitter sister who poisoned your mind with fabricated documents. Terrence looked between me and his mother. The initial surge of explosive rage was slowly giving way to cold, calculated legal logic. What is the alternative? He asked, his voice steadying into a dangerous hum. We give them exactly what they want, I said, a dark smile touching the corners of my mouth. We give them the most lavish, expensive, highly publicized wedding reception this city has seen all year. We let them invite every single wealthy connection they are desperately trying to impress. We let them stand inside the grand ballroom of the Vanguard estate and drink vintage champagne. We let them build a pedestal so high that the inevitable fall will absolutely shatter them into dust. Terrence crossed his arms, leaning back against the mahogany bookshelf. He was tracking the strategy perfectly. And the marriage license, I am not legally binding myself to a fraud. You simply forget your passport and birth certificate on the morning of the ceremony, Yvonne suggested smoothly, demonstrating the ruthless pragmatism that made her a banking legend. Tell the officiant you will sign the legal paperwork on Monday morning due to a missing signature from the county clerk. The ceremony will be completely performative, no legal binding whatsoever. We let them get to the reception. I continued laying out the final architecture of the trap. We let Madison give her toast. We let her thank her parents for their incredible wealth and generosity. And then, Terrence, you take the microphone. You present your financial findings to the entire room. And I will step out of the shadows and present mine. Terrence let out a sharp, incredulous breath, finally grasping the sheer scale of the psychological warfare we were deploying. He looked at the evidence files spread across my coffee table, then looked back at me. They are going to be trapped in a room with 300 of the most influential people in Chicago, including my entire family and all of my corporate partners, and they will have absolutely nowhere to run. Exactly, I said. We are going to lock the doors, figuratively speaking, and hand them the match to light their own pyre. They want to play billionaire socialites at my expense. I am going to make sure their final performance is unforgettable. Yvonne raised her glass of bourbon, her eyes gleaming with predatory approval. To the wedding of the season, she toasted, her voice smooth and chillingly calm. Terrence picked up a crystal tumbler from the side table, the hesitation entirely gone from his posture. He clinked his glass against his mother's, then turned his dark, resolute eyes to me. To the wedding of the season, he echoed. I did not hold a glass, but I smiled, knowing the board was perfectly set. My family was going to walk down the aisle straight into a financial and legal slaughterhouse, completely blind to the executioners waiting at the altar. The evening before the wedding arrived with a heavy downpour that washed the Chicago streets clean. I stood in the kitchen of my penthouse, pouring a glass of sparkling water, enjoying the absolute quiet of a trap perfectly set. The legal documents were locked in my corporate safe. The security teams at the Vanguard estate were briefed and ready. Tomorrow was going to be a masterpiece of controlled demolition. The sharp chime of my private elevator access buzzed, interrupting the silence. I glanced at the security monitor mounted on the marble wall. Brenda was standing in the lobby downstairs, aggressively jabbing the intercom button with her manicured finger. I authorized her entry, genuinely curious about what level of audacity she was about to bring into my home on the eve of her final performance. A minute later, the heavy metal doors of my private elevator slid open directly into my foyer. Brenda marched in, shaking the rainwater from her expensive trench coat. She did not bother with a greeting. Her eyes darted around the sprawling, multi-million-dollar penthouse, taking in the panoramic views of the city skyline, the custom-imported Italian furniture, and the vaulted ceilings. Instead of recognizing the sheer wealth required to live in a property like this, her mind immediately constructed a narrative that fit her delusions. "You must have incredible luck finding a sublet like this," Brenda said, her voice echoing in the grand space as she kicked off her wet shoes. "Or the actual owner must be desperate for a house sitter to keep the dust off. Just make sure you do not damage any of this furniture, Cassidy. You certainly cannot afford to replace it on a cleaner's salary." I leaned against the kitchen island, taking a slow sip of my water. "It is a very secure arrangement, Mother. I promise you the owner is more than satisfied with how I manage the property." Brenda waved her hand dismissively, completely uninterested in my living situation. She stomped over to the kitchen island and slammed a crumpled plastic shopping bag onto the pristine quartz countertop. She looked frantic, the stress of funding a fraudulent wedding clearly taking a toll on her heavily powdered face. "I do not have time for idle chatter," Brenda snapped, digging into the plastic bag. "Tomorrow is the most important day of Madison's life. Terrence's family is flying in highly influential guests from all over the country. Corporate executives, federal judges, banking magnates. We are operating on a razor-thin margin for error, and I will not allow you to ruin our reputation." She yanked a bundle of fabric out of the bag and threw it directly at my chest. I caught it before it hit the floor. It was a cheap, stiff polyester uniform. A hideous, shapeless gray dress, complete with a white apron and a generic name tag pinned to the collar. It smelled faintly of industrial warehouse chemicals. "I want you wearing that the second you step onto the grounds of the Vanguard estate," Brenda commanded, her voice dropping into a harsh, authoritarian bark. "You will use the service entrance at the back of the property near the loading docks. You are not to interact with the catering staff, and you are absolutely forbidden from walking through the main lobby." I looked down at the scratchy polyester fabric in my hands, the visual representation of exactly how my mother viewed my existence. "You want me to wear a costume?" I noted, my tone completely flat. "It is not a costume, it is your uniform," Brenda corrected viciously. "I know you told Madison you would bring your little maid service to deep clean the venue for free. I expect the grand ballroom to be immaculate before the florists arrive at noon. But once the guests begin showing up for the ceremony, you will disappear. You will stay in the service corridors. Do not let Terrence's family see you. Do not speak to anyone. You are just there to clean up Cassidy. You are not a guest. Do you understand me?" I stared at the woman who had stolen my college fund, hijacked my social security number, and actively plotted to destroy my financial future to buy her way into high society. She stood in my penthouse inside a building my corporation owned, barking orders at me like I was a stray dog she had graciously allowed into the yard. If I were the broken 19-year-old girl she had kicked to the curb a decade and a half ago, this moment would have destroyed me. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a predator observing prey that had willingly walked into the cage and locked the door from the inside. "Are you listening to me?" Brenda demanded, slapping her hand against the quartz countertop when I did not immediately respond. "This is not a request. If you embarrass your sister tomorrow, if you try to mingle with people who are so far out of your league, it is laughable. I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." I slowly folded the cheap gray apron, deliberately smoothing out the wrinkles. I looked up at Brenda, and a calm, eerie smile spread across my face. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth, packed with the quiet, lethal certainty of a judge handing down a final sentence. Brenda faltered for a fraction of a second. She expected me to argue. She expected me to cry, or to demand an invitation to the reception, or to complain about the harshness of her rules. My absolute, unbothered compliance unnerved her. But her monumental ego quickly paved over that brief flash of intuition. She convinced herself that I was simply accepting my lowly place in her grand hierarchy. "You do not need to worry, Mother," I said, my voice smooth, melodic, and chillingly precise. "I understand my assignment perfectly. I will make sure the grand ballroom is flawless. I will handle all the trash." Brenda let out a sharp breath of relief, adjusting her expensive trench coat. "Good. See that you do. Madison needs everything to be absolutely perfect tomorrow. Do not be late. She turned on her heel and marched back toward the private elevator, eager to escape the presence of her disappointment of a daughter. As the metal doors slid open to receive her, she cast one final disdainful look over her shoulder. Just remember your place, Cassidy. The elevator doors closed, sealing her fate. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, the cheap polyester uniform still resting in my hands. I walked over to the stainless steel trash can, stepped on the pedal, and dropped the gray dress directly into the garbage. Don't worry, Mother, I whispered to the empty room. I'll make sure tomorrow is a clean sweep. I walked down the hallway into my master bedroom and opened my expansive walk-in closet. Hanging perfectly pressed in the center of the illuminated display was a custom-tailored midnight blue Tom Ford suit. It was a $10,000 masterpiece of modern tailoring paired with a crisp silk blouse and genuine diamond cufflinks. It was the exact opposite of a maid's uniform. It was the armor of a conqueror. I turned off the closet lights and went to bed, sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow the sun would rise over the Vanguard estate, and before it set, my family's entire world would be burned to ash. The morning sun broke across the sprawling manicured lawns of the Vanguard estate, illuminating the centuries-old stone architecture and the towering oak trees that lined the main drive. It was a picture of absolute unyielding wealth, and walking through the grand mahogany double doors, acting as though they had personally laid every single brick, were my parents. Richard and Brenda arrived 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. They immediately began treating the historic multi-million-dollar property as their personal kingdom. Brenda strutted through the main foyer in an outrageously expensive champagne-colored gown, her heels echoing sharply against the imported Italian marble. She ran a critical finger along a gold-leafed console table, scoffing loudly to ensure the nearby event coordinators could hear her displeasure over imaginary dust. Madison made her grand entrance shortly after descending the sweeping curved staircase in her custom Parisian haute couture gown. The dress she had funded with a fraudulent loan taken out in my name dragged heavily across the pristine steps. She carried herself like a conquering queen, demanding absolute obedience from everyone in her line of sight. They descended upon the venue staff like a swarm of locusts. A young waiter hurrying past with a tray of crystal champagne flutes accidentally stepped slightly out of his designated lane to avoid a floral arrangement. Richard snapped his fingers at the young man, a harsh, demeaning sound that cut through the elegant atmosphere. "Watch where you are walking, boy," Richard barked, adjusting his rented tuxedo cuffs. "We are paying an absolute fortune for this venue, and I will not have clumsy hired help ruining the aesthetic. Find your manager right now and tell them I want you reassigned to the kitchen where you belong." The young waiter flushed red and hurried away. Standing perfectly still by the main entrance was the head of the private security detail, a towering, broad-shouldered man named Hayes. Hayes was a former military contractor handpicked by my corporate team to oversee all high-risk properties under the Lumina Estate Management umbrella. He knew every square inch of this estate. More importantly, he knew exactly whose signature was on his paycheck. Hayes did not intervene when Richard yelled at the waiter. He simply caught the eye of another security operative stationed by the grand staircase, and the two men exchanged a very brief, highly amused smirk. They were highly trained professionals, but watching these arrogant strangers bark orders in a house they did not own was providing exceptional morning entertainment. Yvonne arrived a few minutes later, leading a delegation of Terrence's family. They were a striking vision of genuine class and generational achievement. Yvonne wore a sophisticated plum suit flanked by her brothers and sisters, who included federal judges, university deans, and senior surgical directors. They did not need to project wealth because they actually possessed it. Brenda immediately locked onto them like a vulture spotting fresh prey. She plastered on a blinding artificial smile and threw her arms open, rushing across the marble floor. "Yvonne, darling, welcome to our little celebration," Brenda announced, pitching her voice loud enough to echo off the vaulted ceilings. "I do hope the drive from the city was not too taxing for your relatives. We just fell in love with the Vanguard estate the moment we saw it. We told Madison that no expense should be spared for her special day. We simply demanded the absolute best venue in the state. Yvonne accepted the greeting with icy, flawless grace. She looked around the breathtaking foyer, her keen eyes taking in the spectacular floral arrangements, the towering Corinthian columns, and the sheer monumental scale of the property. She knew exactly who owned this building, and it certainly was not the woman currently bragging about it. "It is a truly magnificent property," Brenda Yvonne replied, her tone perfectly even. The level of ownership and brilliant corporate management required to maintain an estate of this caliber is truly formidable. One has to admire the brilliant mind behind it all. Brenda preened, completely missing the lethal hidden meaning in Yvonne's words. She assumed Yvonne was complimenting her exquisite choice of venue. "Well, it takes a certain pedigree to appreciate historic value," Brenda boasted, waving her hand toward the soaring crystal chandelier. "Richard and I have always prioritized high society elegance. We want Terence to feel welcome in our world." Richard puffed out his chest, stepping up beside his wife to reinforce their imaginary dominance. "We have highly exacting standards," he added, eyeing Hayes and the security team with open disdain. "Though finding good help these days is nearly impossible. I have already had to reprimand the catering staff twice this morning. And do not even get me started on the cleaning crew." Madison glided over, joining her parents to complete the triad of delusion. She placed a carefully manicured hand on Yvonne's arm. "Speaking of the cleaning crew," Madison said, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial, gossipy whisper, "I must apologize in advance if you happen to see my older sister lurking in the service corridors today. We took pity on her and allowed her small maid service to handle the pre-wedding trash removal. We explicitly instructed her to use the loading dock and stay out of sight, but you know how desperate the lower classes can be for attention." Brenda nodded sympathetically, playing the role of the burdened mother. "It breaks my heart to see her scrub floors, but she made her choices. We just hope she does not embarrass us today." Yvonne did not flinch. She took a slow, elegant sip from a glass of sparkling water a passing waiter had offered her. Her dark eyes gleamed with a predatory anticipation that Madison and Brenda were far too self-absorbed to recognize. "I am sure your sister will make quite an impression today, Madison," Yvonne said, her voice smooth as silk. "I look forward to seeing her work. I have a feeling she is going to clean this entire place out." Across the foyer, Hayes adjusted the earpiece discreetly tucked into his right ear. The encrypted security channel clicked open. "Perimeter team checking in," a voice murmured through the radio frequency. "The primary asset has just passed the main gates. Estimated time of arrival to the grand entrance is exactly 2 minutes." Hayes tapped his microphone twice in silent acknowledgement. He looked over at Richard, Brenda, and Madison, who were currently attempting to order a senior event coordinator to scrub a non-existent scuff mark off the marble floor. The sheer arrogance of these people standing in a fortress they did not own, berating staff they did not employ to impress a family they could never equal, was a masterclass in psychological delusion. Hayes folded his hands behind his back, a dangerous, knowing glint lighting up his eyes. The trespassers were entirely oblivious, complaining about the hired help while drinking stolen champagne. The true owner of the Vanguard estate was pulling up the driveway, and the illusion of grandeur was about to be shattered permanently. The string quartet shifted into a lively classical piece as the final guests filed into the grand ballroom of the Vanguard estate. This space was a breathtaking display of architectural dominance. Crystal chandeliers the size of small vehicles hung from the frescoed ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the sea of silk velvet and tailored tuxedos. Richard and Brenda were exactly where they wanted to be, positioned near the head table, loudly taking credit for the towering white orchids and the imported linens. They were desperately trying to match the effortless grace of Terence's extended family, who mingled with the quiet confidence of people who actually belonged in these rooms. Madison sat at the center of the room, her massive Parisian gown spilling over her chair, radiating smug satisfaction. She had legally bound herself to a wealthy corporate lawyer, or so she thought, and was now preparing to bask in the admiration of Chicago's elite. Then the massive mahogany doors at the main entrance of the ballroom swung open. Hayes, the head of my private security detail, stood rigidly to the side and held the door open. He did not do this for the catering staff. He did not do this for the guests. He did it because his employer had just arrived. I stepped into the grand ballroom. I was not wearing the scratchy, foul-smelling gray polyester maid's uniform my mother had thrown at me the night before. I was wearing a masterpiece. It was a custom-tailored $10,000 midnight blue suit cut from Italian silk and wool. The lines were razor-sharp, designed to project absolute executive authority. A pristine white silk blouse rested beneath the jacket, and my cuffs were secured by flawless, square-cut diamond links. I wore my hair pulled back in a sleek, uncompromising style. I did not look like a house cleaner who had snuck into a billionaire's party. I looked like the billionaire who owned the building. My heels struck the polished hardwood floor with a rhythmic, commanding sound. A ripple of whispers began to spread through the perimeter of the room. High society guests are trained to recognize power, and the energy I projected as I walked into that ballroom caused several influential banking executives and corporate partners to turn their heads. Across the room, Brenda was in the middle of boasting to one of Terrence's uncles about her imaginary stock portfolio. She glanced toward the entrance, likely expecting to see another wealthy relative arriving late. Her eyes locked onto me. The color drained from my mother's face so fast she looked physically ill. The crystal champagne flute in her hand trembled, spilling a few drops of expensive liquid onto the floor. Her mind violently rejected what she was seeing. She expected me to be hauling garbage bags